So hello all and welcome. My name is Coy D'Souza and I'll be chairing tonight's event entitled NATO, Ukraine and Russia, War, Propaganda and Censorship. Please note that this is being recorded and it's also being live streamed on No Cold War's YouTube channel. The event has been organised by No Cold War Britain, the British group of the International No Cold War campaign, which was set up to oppose the new Cold War. The social media channels and website are being put into the chat function, so please give them a follow to stay up to date. No Cold War has also put out 2 statements on the situation in Ukraine, which are also going to be put into the chat, and I'd encourage you all to sign it. One of them is on ending the war in Ukraine and constructing a lasting peace, and the other on NATO's eastward expansion. In terms of the format of the event, it is due to run for an hour and a half till around 8:30, which includes around an hour of speaker contributions, followed by Q&As. And we're very pleased to have a great mix of international and British-based speakers: Andrew Feinstein, Camilla Escalante, Asa Winstanley, Anna Chen, Kayla Casada, and Steve Sweeney. Moving on now to Anna Chen, who's a writer, poet, and broadcaster. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much for having me. No Cold War is about the only home I feel like I have during this period. I'm going to come up with the subject of Ukraine from an oblique angle because it feels like this war is the penultimate step towards a world war. So if we look back long ago when China explored the world in the 15th century, and reached as far as East Africa, they traded a bit and they brought back a giraffe. So the same century when Europeans landed in the Americas in 1492, they killed and enslaved its native peoples, stole their treasures and gave them smallpox blankets in an early form of biological warfare. In North America, 100 million Native Americans were killed. Black Africans were put through slavery, Jim Crow, and imprisonment. The USA was literally built on an ancient Indian burial ground because that's what they'd turned it into. And that's pretty much been the template ever since. Europeans sailed beyond their own lands for conquest, glory, and fortune. The Chinese mostly stayed at home. The Chinese invented gunpowder for great firework displays. Europeans turned gunpowder into murderous weapons of conquest. So if China is the newly rich kid wearing a Rolex who's wandered onto mafia turf and is about to get rolled, then America is the 300-pound ex-champ who's geriatric and punch drunk from all those fights. He's pinned the kid against a wall, fist in his face, screaming blue murder that the kid's about to hit him. Australia and Britain, the ugly sisters of the peace, and they nod enthusiastically and use the opportunity to bury bad news like hard no-deal Brexit fallout, a wrecked economy, excess COVID deaths, and a society that's breaking down. There were 17,000 gunshot killings in the first 6 months of the year, I was reading today, and that's, of course, you know, with today's latest shooting spree in Texas. So Asian people are scapegoated, attacked and killed, all whipped up by the crudest anti-Chinese racism that's laying dormant as an inserted yellow peril memory. And that's now being triggered at every level by the fourth estate of the state, the mainstream media. On top of the $750 billion a year spend on military preparation for attacking China, Biden has slapped a $500 million a year propaganda bounty on China's head. And you can take an educated guess as to which world leaders and their associates are flocking to get some of that. It's clearly having a profound effect on our collective sanity. Only a few days ago in Bristol, the Sims family were burnt out of their home in an arson attack. So I hope people please give support. That's on my Twitter details there. And that's about where we are right now. Sometimes it feels like we're living in the fall of the Roman Empire with technology, and sometimes it's the 1930s, and someone is doing their best to pin the blood libel on the Chinese. It was only 4 years ago that Christine Lagarde had pointed out the global economy was advancing in sync for the first time. Oh joy, we might never need war again. But of course, the plutocrats and the industry giants of the West don't just hold the delusion of conquest of China as the end game. They're also ridding themselves of surplus labor, which is, of course, us. Pampered middle and working class Westerners of the post-war liberal era who never had it so good are now being hollowed out and presented with the bill. So how did we get from the global economy running in sync and relative peace to the West's race towards a war on the fat, juicy prize that is China? The Anglosphere's propaganda wars rely on the public not joining the dots. Events are presented as mysterious, disjointed acts of the cosmos without cause or effect. Never forget the Battle of Orgreave, 18th of June, 1984, which rehearsed and revealed the depth of manipulation by the state. Thousands of striking coal miners were picketing the British steel coking plant. The day erupted in violent clashes between the miners and the heavy police presence, many of whom were on horseback. The news bulletins that night showed the miners attacking the police, who seemingly horse-charged them in response. Quite reasonable, you'd think, and this elicited public sympathy for the cops and outrage towards the miners. However, when the original film was examined, it emerged that they'd shown the news footage in reverse order, reversing cause and effect. They cut up the narrative, respliced it, started it at Act 2, slashed the backstory entirely, recast heroes as villains and villains as heroes. Attackers became victims and victims attackers. In the same way, the 8 years of war on Russian speakers in Ukraine ever since the violent coup in 2014 is disappeared like magic. So please just remember that operational template. So I just want to go through a short 21st century timeline of the march to World War III. So George W. Bush designates China a competitor in his 2000 election and in 2005 when he's standing in the rubble of Iraq. China begins to buy US debt in 2000. In 2006, the value of the US dollar falls by a third because of Iraq war inflation. Meantime, an alarming housing bubble is being pumped up. When China complains about the loss of their investment, the US tells them to suck it up. 2 years later, America's economic shenanigans lead to a breakdown of their system with the financial meltdown in the US Great Crash of 2008. A global depression is feared. China steps in to act as a shock absorber and rescues the world economy by allowing global currencies to devalue against the yuan, taking a massive economic hit themselves. They buy even more huge amounts of US debt until China holds over $1 trillion, and they stimulate domestic consumption because 1.4 billion Chinese can buy a lot of goods. So China saves the world economy from devastation. And so how is China thanked for this? In October 2011, only 3 years after China saves us all from America's great crash, Hillary Clinton, Obama's Secretary of State, writes her notorious piece urging the US to take control of the Western Pacific, that's the South China Sea to us, and the Central Eurasia landmass. Now, 3 huge countries lie in a straight line across the landmass from Europe to Asia. They are from west to east: Ukraine, Kazakhstan, where we saw an attempted coup in January, and Mongolia, plus the little-known region of China that was once called Xinjiang in ancient times, and it's now known as Xinjiang. This is China's backdoor into Central Asia and Europe. Taiwan, by the way, claims Mongolia as part of China. So be careful what you wish for, and let's hope President Tsai isn't made empress of all the Chinas, as the USA seems to want. The title of Hillary's piece is America's Pacific Century, and it basically lays out the aims of the project for the new American century. Hillary writes, there should be no doubt that America has the capacity to secure and sustain our global leadership in this century as we did in the last. The future of politics will be decided in Asia, not Afghanistan or Iraq, and the United States will be right at the center of the action. A year later, 2012, President Obama pivots to Asia, removing the US military from the Middle East and pouring it into Asia, where America has about 400 bases surrounding China already. So by doing so, America takes the first step in existentially threatening China. 2013, Australia and the US practice war on China in the Talisman Sabre, involving tens of thousands of troops. 2014, the US and Philippines begin annual military exercises over the pretext of disputed islands and shoals. In fact, Philippines and China are getting on quite well now. It's a local difficulty and they are going to have to work it out between themselves. Vietnam had already started militarizing their reclaimed islands back in the 1970s. In 2015, Xi offers Obama that he won't militarize China's reclaimed islands if the US stops threatening them. Obama's response is to sail the US fleet of warships straight into the South China Sea. He holds military exercises in the Malacca Strait between Indonesia and Malaysia, threatening to fence in China. By the way, 80% of South China Sea traffic is, of course, China sending us their goods. Donald Trump is elected in 2016, partly in fear of Hillary's enthusiasm for World War. Trump launches a trade war on China on spurious grounds. He claims a huge deficit, but when you factor in the American corporate giants providing sales and services inside China, like Apple, Microsoft, McDonald's, Nike, Coke, and Starbucks, the deficit is actually a surplus of about 24 billion. Around the same time as Trump's trade war, there's a slew of Thucydides trap articles warning us not to have a war just because Athens is catching up with Sparta. China negotiates trade in good faith, but refuses to buckle.
Sorry, Anna, just to say one more minute.
I'm getting to that point. Okay, I'm going to tie this up. Basically, faced by a China that's stronger than he expected, by summer 2019, Trump has closed the White House pandemic team and the CDC office in Beijing. And I'll just finish by saying that coincidentally, Boris Johnson ascends to the Downing Street premiership that summer. And you know what one of the first things is that he does? He closes the British pandemic team. This is also in July 2019. I'm going to leave it there because I'm sure that everyone can join up the dots and work out what's been happening. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anna. As ever, merging characteristic literary impulses with incisive political insights to great effect, brilliantly joining the geopolitical dots. And I think it's important to understand this conflict in terms of NATO and US attempts to undermine the Russia-China comprehensive strategic relationship. Moving on now. So we're coming up to 8:30 now. So I just want to say thank you to all the speakers for a timely, insightful and wide-ranging discussion on a defining geopolitical crisis of our time. As the conflict continues to unfold, we hope this discussion has shed light on key issues shaping people's understanding of events and, of course, how they influence the path towards achieving a lasting, peaceful settlement. But also to add, we have more upcoming events planned, you'll be delighted to know. So a date for your diary, Wednesday, 15th of June. And in the context of the upcoming NATO summit in June, we've got a great lineup of speakers discussing the theme of opposing the new age of US militarism, Britain's junior role in new threats to world peace. There should be more info in the chat. And also to stay up to date in relation to that event and future updates, you can follow us on Twitter. These should be in the chat, but I'll just repeat them quickly again. Twitter is @NCW Britain, Facebook @No Cold War Britain, Instagram @No Cold War _Britain. And again, this event is being uploaded onto YouTube, so it can also be viewed there afterwards. We tried to live stream it, but I understand there were a couple of issues, but it will, as I mentioned, be uploaded. So thank you again to all the speakers, organisers, and of course our esteemed audience. Until next time. Take care, everyone.